Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Since even before prehistoric times, before there were even dinosaurs in Teyvat, for over 3 years, one man has dominated the support meta. Will a Ronin Samurai finally have some competition from an Ocelot DJ? Well, let's find out just how sick of a beat a Constellation 0 Xilonen can drop. For some reason, introducing dinosaurs to Teyvat led to an explosion of technology, faster than Paimon can even spot a snack. Who'd have thunk that the land of dinosaurs would have high-tech portable DJ equipment, magical rollerblades to burn your resin even faster, and an infinite supply of double bubble bubblegum all in one formidable package that is Xilonen. We'll be dividing her kit into two main playstyles. A drop the beat build, where she drops the beat to support her team with the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City artifact set. And a second playstyle, drop the beat down build, where she beat downs the enemy with her own claws and paws with the Flute of Ezpitzal and the 4-piece Obsidian Codex. Her talents are at 9, 9, and 9, and she's of course at Constellation 0 throughout the entire video. Let's take a quick look at how much damage her support build does. Yeah, okay, we're not going to be using her for damage. Let's talk about her skill, Yoho's Scratch. You'll see these colorful Doritos, aka source samplers, which are based on the elements of our party members. These source samplers can be the following elements: a Geo Zesty Cheese Dorito, a Pyro Spicy Nacho Dorito, an Electro Spicy Sweet Chili Dorito, a Cryo Cool Ranch Dorito, and a Hydro Soggy Dorito. Or as I'll just be calling these crystallizable Pyro, Electro, Cryo, and Hydro elements, the Petch elements for short moving forward. These Doritos are activated when the Dorito is colored in, and when activated will shred the resistance of the activated elements of nearby enemies by 33% at talent level 9 or 36% at talent level 10. Multiple Doritos of the same flavor do not stack. Now, Geo Source samplers actually start off colored in and are always active while in Night Soul state. However, how do we color in the Petch elements? Why, by filling up her Night Soul points. This brings us to Support Xilonen, where if there are at least 2 Petch element characters in her party, this activates the first part of her passive, where she gains 35 Night Soul points per normal attack that hits the enemy. And since she starts at 45 out of 90 Night Soul points, a simple E, N1, N2 fills up her Night Soul points, which then ends her Night Soul state and colors in the colors for the Petch Doritos, which means that nearby enemies now have their resistances shred by up to 36% at Constellation 0. Of course, you can swap her off and they're still active, and you can see that the source samplers are active via this nifty beat beating around your on-field character. In this example, we can see that Guoba on his own is critting for 4,538 damage. Then, with the Cinder City's buff and Xilonen's 33% resistance shred, now Guoba is doing 7,157 damage. A very solid 57.71% increase to Guoba's damage. And if we include her signature weapon, Peak Patrol Song, which adds an additional 25.6% bonus damage for Guoba, now Guoba's Spicy Dorito Breath is doing 8,138 damage, or 79.3% more damage. And I know a lot of people will be very curious about this, so let's compare Xilonen to Kazuha. In the end, the damage buffs they provide are very similar to each other, with the gap closing even further if Xilonen's skill is at level 10. On top of that, Xilonen's buffs last for 15 seconds instead of Kazuha's usual 8 to 10 seconds. I'll yap a bit more about Kazuha vs Xilonen later on in this video, but just know that both of them are clearly incredible damage buffers and supports. But that's not all, because we still have her Elemental Burst, Ocelotleku Point. That's going to be the only time I say that in this video. While in support mode, Xilonen's Elemental Burst deals an initial slam of damage plus 8 pulses of healing to the on-field character. Even with this Favonius build, which obviously isn't focused on healing, she's healing the on-field character for 6,000 HP per tick, scaling off of her defense stat for 8 ticks for a total of 48,000 HP. She can punch her DJ controller once every 15 seconds, with a 60 energy cost. And the party just keeps on going, because while in Drop the Beat support mode, Xilonen will trigger an additional Night Soul burst after she colors in her Doritos. This additional Night Soul burst is also independent of the team's Night Soul burst cooldown, and she can do this once every 14 seconds. This effectively leads to one free Night Soul burst roughly every single rotation, and a character like, for example, Milani will definitely appreciate the larger burst numbers. Oh, and Xilonen gets 20% defense to boot when Night Soul Burst is triggered, because why the heck not? Support Xilonen will provide 36% resistance shred at talent level 10, 40% elemental damage from the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City artifact set, 48,000-ish HP single target healing when she uses her burst, an additional Night Soul Burst pretty much once per rotation, and if you have her signature weapon, another 25.6% additional bonus damage. That's a lot of buffs, and all for a relatively short field time. And because her burst is optional, a simple EN1 N2 only takes around 1.5 seconds, and with her as needed burst, it now takes 3.23 seconds. As you can see, this Ocelot sure do support a lot. That leads us to Drop the Beatdown DPS Xilonen. Drop the Beatdown Xilonen is fulfilled when there are 0 to 1 Petch element characters in her party. Let's take a look at what a Drop the Beatdown Xilonen is capable of with the free-to-play friendly craftable Flute of Ezpitzal. Yep, Drop the Beatdown Xilonen was able to single cycle our level 103 Registrying Friends, 273,905 hit points with just Geo Resonance to help her out. Let's go over what's going on here. In DPS mode, when she uses her skill, her normal attacks now scale off of the defense stat and deal geo damage. Since she's draining Night Soul points, she also works with the Obsidian Codex. Also, instead of her normal attacks generating Night Soul points like her support mode does, her normal attacks in DPS mode no longer generate Night Soul points, and instead now deal 30% increased damage. As an added bonus, because her Geo Doritos are always colored in, this means that the 33% Geo resistance shred is also being applied while she's in Night Soul state. And yeah, we have her burst, which is also converted over to beatdown mode, where instead of healing and just hitting once for a 478.2% defense scaling multiplier, it now hits 3 times, which is 1,434.6% defense scaling multiplier. It is important to mention though that DPS Xilonen's burst no longer heals. In total, at talent level 9, this Drop the Beatdown Xilonen dealt around 3,188% defense scaling multiplier in 9 seconds. Looking at all these buffs to her own damage, in hindsight, it's actually no wonder why Xilonen actually deals non-negligible damage. But before you get too excited over damage output, this is admittingly not like an insane amount of damage. This is what I would describe as a rock solid and usable, non-negligible amount of damage. Alright, now let's jump through some general info before moving on. Her skill generates 4 geoparticles on the initial rush hit. Although as usual with particles, more testing needs to be done. Her skill's 7-second cooldown begins after her E ends. The initial hit on her skill applies Geo, and N1 actually does apply Geo right after her skill, but usually it doesn't crystallize because of the 1-second crystallized cooldown. Dashing consumes Night Soul points around 3 times faster, and her resistance shred range isn't too big, but it's perfectly usable for most characters in most situations. It's also worth noting that for support Xilonen, there are no Animo, Dendro, or physical Doritos, meaning that Xilonen cannot resistance shred Animo, Dendro, and physical elements. And if all that was really overwhelming, well, as a wise philosopher once said, support cat, E-N-N. Q if need healing. If angry cat, E-N-N-N-N-N-N-N-N-N-N. Q for big rock pain. We finally made it to the team section. Now if you can't tell, Xilonen is absurdly flexible, so I've chosen just 8 teams to showcase to you all, but obviously there's a lot more than 8 teams that she can be on. Let's start with one of the most recent and obvious options, Milani. This setup with this team for Milani feels incredibly smooth, because Xilonen can choose to only crystallize a single time. This leaves just enough hydro gauge for Sucrose to then swirl. On top of that, the additional Night Soul burst is a nice damage boost to Milani's elemental burst. Personally, this is an incredible feeling team for Milani. Now, of all the characters that potentially needed a buff, it was Neuvillette. Who said that Kazuha and Xilonen had to compete? In this case, they can absolutely work together. And Shilonen's healing, while not really able to fully offset Furina's damage, is able to provide enough healing for this team to still excel. Now you'll notice that the crit values of these teams are quite low to say the least, and the talent levels are also all at level 9, so I've taken the liberty of adding something that makes sense, like a signature weapon, or in Neuvillette's case, this Constellation 1 to work better with Furina. Anyway, these runs are more proof of concept than an accurate reflection of true endgame power. Up next we have an Aggravate team. Thanks to Shilonen's comparatively long 15-second buff duration, she's able to buff more of Cyno's damage in comparison to most other supports. Needless to say though, she'll work with other aggravate-focused DPS characters such as Keqing or Yaimiko, because her buffs also affect the entire team, including off-field characters like Fischl. And what better character to highlight than Arlecchino herself? Pairing Kazuha with Xilonen will be incredible for mono-element damage teams, similar to the Neuvillette team, which is essentially a mono-hydro team. Both Arlecchino and Linny will absolutely enjoy having both Kazuha and Xilonen on their teams. In the last team for the support section, we have a Navia team. Xilonen is a ridiculously great Geo buffer as well, especially for Navia, who saw minimal benefits from Goro. Shilonen's Geo damage bonus via the Cinder City and Geo Resonance Shred is great for Navia's damage. Now the only drawback with using Xilonen for Navia is Xilonen doesn't generate any crystallizes while she's off field, but still I think she's a great teammate for Geo characters as well. Next we've reached what I think is the most entertaining thing about Xilonen, DPS Xilonen. First up we have Hyper Carry Xilonen. This team consists of her team just buffing her damage as much as possible. Kachina is invaluable as the Cinder City user, Yelan provides bonus damage, and Goro provides massive defense buffs. With this setup, despite this very suboptimal build with only 189.7 crit value on Xilonen, she's still able to output impressive 96k burst shockwaves and 36k normals. Sadly, this team is relying on crystallizes and Constellation 4 Goro's healing for sustain, but it's a surprisingly still functional team. And the fun doesn't stop there, because we've got Plunge Xilonen up next. Yeah, Hoyoverse clearly and intentionally added 30% plunge damage to Xilonen's passive, as this team is quite functional. She's able to hit up to 92k plunges, which is pretty hilarious for such a setup. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to fully utilize all 8 plunges, but 7 plunges is still perfectly functional. Also, as an added bonus, all the characters' cooldowns lined up perfectly, so they're able to keep this pain train perpetually running. Now, needless to say, there's just so much potential with Xilonen, and sadly, I was only able to just barely scratch the surface of what she can do. She's obviously going to be great with cryo, potentially some melt setups, and even double crystallized setups. Speaking of which, a weakness I've noticed with Xilonen is that it's difficult for her to crystallize 2 elements for the Cinder City's buff, due to the way that Crystallize works. In comparison to a character like Kazuha, whose infusion is invaluable for swirling multiple elements, double Crystallize seems a bit less practical. Still, I'm sure that the more creative parts of the player base will figure out how to crystallize multiple elements. It also goes without saying that Xilonen doesn't group enemies like Kazuha can, and since her buffs last much longer at 15 seconds, she has more flexibility to go earlier in the rotation than a character like Kazuha, or to simply have her buffs last through much longer of the on-field DPS character's rotation. Also, since her buffs persist and follow your active character, she's great against multi-wave content as well, not needing to swap back on for characters that hate swapping off, like for example Clorond and Cyno. On top of that, she has competitively low field time for a support character and a short 7-second cooldown on her skill, and provides that invaluable quality of life healing as well. You also saw the potential she has as a main DPS character, which is surprisingly quite usable. Now, her as a main DPS character certainly isn't setting any records, but it is very functional. Personally, I think Xilonen is one of the best support characters we've seen in a long time, and as an added bonus, a usable DPS character. And her flexibility and compatibility with all Petch and Geo characters will make her an invaluable addition to pretty much anyone's account. Oh right, and she's top tier for exploration in Natlan as well, which I didn't even have time to talk about in this video. So if you're curious about her exploration capabilities, check out my previous video where I focused a bit more on exploration if that's what you want to see. Anyway, I'm personally extremely impressed with Xilonen and can't wait to see all the creative things that the community does with her. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.